Imagine this, just for a second. You're at your child's high school graduation. Big day, right? Full of pride, all that hard work finally paying off. But instead of just, soaking it all in, you find yourself, well, you're in this silent standoff. It's tense. You're facing security guards, even a powerful state senator. And they're trying to get you to leave, not because you did anything wrong, not because you caused a scene, just because of who you are, it seems. And then you see it, a trickle of blood. What do you even do in that moment? And what does that whole scene tell us about the system supposedly there to protect everyone? So today we're doing a really powerful deep dive into exactly that kind of situation. We're looking at the complex, often kind of hidden issues of race and discrimination inside the U.S. military. And this isn't just, about what happens far away. It stretches right from the most prestigious academies, right into the daily lives of service members. Every rank, every interaction. We've gathered a whole stack of sources for you, really detailed investigative reports from places like PBS and AP News, some incredibly moving personal stories, and even a viral social media thing that, it really caught people's attention. Our mission here is to get past that shiny motto of equal opportunity in the armed forces and uncover some of the surprising, maybe even uncomfortable truths underneath.
Exactly, because the thing is, and this is what we're really digging into, these moments that seem isolated, like that standoff at the graduation, they can actually pull back the curtain on these really deep systemic problems. What's really insightful, I think, is how one dramatic event like Solomon Draceson's story it's not just an anecdote. It acts like a magnifying glass. It shows up the subtle but really pervasive biases that are embedded in systems we totally expect to be based on merit. Pure meritocracy, right? So our goal today is to show you not just what happened, but really explore why these moments matter so much. What do they tell us about the ongoing struggle for real equality, especially in institutions that define themselves by service and sacrifice? You're going to hear stories that honestly might surprise you, and hopefully you'll get some new insights into these invisible battles fought every single day, often in places where unity should be everything.
Okay, so let's really unpack this incredible story about Solomon Dracason first, because it just perfectly sets the stage, shows the incredibly high personal stakes involved here. It starts with Solomon. He's a former Force Recon Marine, 24 years, decorated service, highly decorated. And he's there for his son, Tyron, who's graduating from Westridge Academy. You can picture him, right? Solomon's 45, still got that disciplined look, the posture from his military career, hands probably weathered from years of tough service, maybe looking at the ribbons on an old uniform he keeps somewhere, each one a story. But this day, it wasn't about him. It was all about Tyron graduating with honors. Now, Westridge Academy, it's described as one of the most prestigious private schools around. Serves mostly the kids of wealthy white families. And the irony, our sources point out, wasn't lost on Solomon. His son managed to thrive in this place where Solomon himself, a decorated veteran, often felt, pretty unwelcome. Tyron was one of only 7 black students graduating. Out of 120, that's not many. Solomon and his wife Vanessa, they'd sacrificed a lot financially to get Tyron into Westridge. They hoped this elite education, the supposed gateway, would shield him somehow. Shield him from the kind of barriers, the quiet assumptions, the invisible lines Solomon had bumped up against his whole life, inside and outside the military. They wanted a smoother path for Tyron. But even with all that hope, all the money they poured in, there was this quiet worry hanging over them. For both Solomon and Vanessa, it came from past experiences, little things that just chipped away at their feeling of belonging. Vanessa, apparently that morning, she looked amazing, proud, but worried too. She reminded Solomon about a winter concert before. At that concert, security guards had followed him everywhere, like he was a threat, not just a dad at a school event. That feeling of being tailed, it stuck with them. Vanessa was quietly worried it would happen again. Solomon tried to reassure her, today will be different. But you could probably hear that little bit of uncertainty, Past experiences aren't easy to shake off.
And that quiet fear, that feeling of vulnerability, even before anything happens. That's not just Solomon or Vanessa. It's kind of a hallmark, isn't it? Of navigating places where these implicit biases are just simmering under the surface. Where the color of your skin can sadly still shape how people see you, no matter what you've achieved or who you are. For someone like Solomon, a decorated veteran, sacrificed so much to still feel that apprehension, that fear of being seen as a threat instead of just a proud dad. That points to a huge societal issue. It really makes you ask, how did these subtle perceptions, these unspoken assumptions, totally undermine belonging, even for people who've dedicated their lives to service? So The tension at this graduation, according to the sources, it started building, subtly but definitely building, way before the big confrontation. There was an announcement, something about enhanced security protocols. Sounded neutral, right? Standard stuff. But Solomon, with his, trained eye, he noticed the security guys starting to move, not just randomly patrolling, but moving specifically towards the small clusters of minority attendees scattered around. It looked targeted, not general. Then, as he walked past the security office, he overheard bits of conversation, phrases like potential threat, military background, and, chillingly, keep eyes on him. It became pretty clear to Solomon right then. He was already being profiled. And then, adding another layer, and actually a layer of protection later on, two of Solomon's old teammates, Michael Chen and William Ortiz, showed up separately. They just kind of blended in, but with this, tactical confidence, Chen sat near the back, watching. Ortiz took a spot near a side exit. Strategic. Even in civilian clothes, you could apparently see their military bearing. These guys know how to assess the situation, move with purpose, trained operators. Security Chief Hargrove, the sources mention, even seemed to notice them arrive. His expression apparently shifted a bit as he talked into his radio, maybe mentioning an increased threat assessment. Solomon's friends arriving somehow justified his actions even more. And the whole atmosphere got even heavier when State Senator Harold Whitman showed up. He was seen talking to Chief Hargrove near the stage. Looked casual, maybe, but to Solomon, not at all. Whitman was known publicly for opposing educational equity stuff, and more recently for pushing laws to remove divisive concepts like teaching racial history from schools. Solomon remembered seeing him at a veterans forum once. Whitman had actually questioned if minority soldiers deserved the same recognition as white soldiers. That memory, pretty raw, burned in Solomon's mind as he watched Whitman gesture, maybe subtly, towards him. It just painted this picture of a politician whose views lined up perfectly with the exact prejudice Solomon was afraid of facing. And all this stress, this growing unease, it even reached his son Tyron backstage. Tyron texted his dad, said security was questioning graduates about their guests, and specifically, unnervingly, about Solomon. The text basically said, might be safer if you wait outside. Yeah. Can you imagine? Your son asking you to leave his graduation to protect you from humiliation? Heartbreaking. Despite that, Solomon's jaw just tightened. He drew on that deep military discipline. Focused. Thought about Tyron, all the challenges he'd overcome in this mostly white school. Nothing, he thought. Nothing distracts from Tyron's achievement today. A quiet promise to himself. Vanessa must have sensed it, the pressure. She quietly squeezed his hand, supporting him, but sharing that deep worry, too. She'd seen him face this kind of thing before.
And this is where it really kicks off, right? Where it goes from just glances and whispers to a full-blown public confrontation. The headmaster, Kensington, he gets back up to the podium. Before handing out diplomas, he makes this announcement that just felt aimed right at Solomon. Said security might need to talk to some attendees as part of standard protocols. And as he said it, his eyes swept kind of meaningfully towards Solomon's section, like a signal, a heads up for what was coming, and bang, right on cue. Security Chief Hargrove, with Walsh and this private security guy, Mercer, they head straight for Solomon's row. Determined looks. Intent was clear. Mercer, the sources say, looks sharp. Expensive suit, not a uniform. Solomon instantly recognized the military bearing. Probably private security, ex-military maybe, but working for different people now. Hargrove gets to their row. Tries to look professional, neutral, but you can see the frustration underneath. So Hargrove asks Solomon to step outside. Says there's a security concern. But Solomon, incredible composure, stays seated. His voice, steady but firm, rings out in the quiet room. My son is graduating in approximately 20 minutes, he says. Any concerns can be addressed after the ceremony. Hargrove's mask slips then. His voice gets harder, insists they've received multiple complaints about threatening behavior. Solomon, still calm, challenges him, asks for specifics. What behavior? Who complained? He points out, logically, there are other veterans here. Nobody's bothering them. Hargrove just waves it off. This isn't a negotiation, he says. Come now, or they'll be forced to remove him. And then Walsh, one of the security guys, steps up. And this is really nasty. He subtly weaponizes Solomon's own service record against him. Says Solomon's military background has been flagged as a potential security concern given recent threats to public events. Chilling, right? Using his sacrifice to paint him as dangerous. Solomon sees right through the wording, calmly asks for documentation. Show me the protocols, the threat assessment, knowing, of course, it doesn't exist. Meanwhile, Vanessa, thinking fast, discreetly starts recording on her phone. Hides it in her lap mostly, capturing everything. And then, from a few rows back, some white parent whispers loudly, I told you they should screen these people more carefully, bringing their politics into our children's special day. Wow. Just perfectly sums up the bias in the room, doesn't it?
Yeah, and what's really striking looking back is how precise it all felt. Like it was planned, almost like a military op in reverse. This wasn't just some random misunderstanding. It felt like a deliberate attempt to intimidate, to isolate, and remove someone based purely on these preconceived, racially biased notions. Hargrove was, as Solomon probably clocked from his own intelligence training, basically building a retroactive paper trail to justify his actions later. It really forces you to ask, when does security protocol stop being about safety and start being used as a cover for discrimination? And what does it mean when your identity, even your distinguished service, can just be turned against you like that, in public, at your kid's graduation? It wasn't just about security, it was fundamentally about dignity, respect. So the tension, already sky high, just snaps. Solomon decides, okay, I'm standing my ground. He slowly gets up. And suddenly, his full height, that military bearing from commanding troops in life or death situations, it's powerfully obvious. Real authority. He looks Hargrove right in the eye, voice measured but firm. I have the right to attend my son's graduation. I've broken no rules. I will not be removed without cause, and I will not allow you to disrupt this ceremony with false allegations. Just unwavering, Hargrove's face hardens, and he reaches out physically for Solomon's arm. Solomon, without being aggressive, just subtly steps back, avoids the touch. "Don't put your hands on me," he says clearly. "I'm not leaving my son's graduation." Everyone around them, silent, watching. Even Tyron in the graduate section turned around, face a mix of anxiety and anger. Walsh moves to flank Solomon, clear escalation. Hargrove's hand moves towards maybe a weapon, maybe cuffs. And he says, "Last chance to leave quietly, Dracason." And Mercer, the consultant, efficiently moves to block the nearest exit, boxing Solomon in. What happened next was apparently so fast, and most people couldn't really process it. Hargrove reaches again, but this time he pushes Solomon backwards. Solomon stumbles, hits a chair. It was quick, but that physical contact, that crossed a major line. Verbal confrontation just became physical assault. As Solomon catches his balance remarkably, without hitting back, that small trickle of blood appears. Lip split from the push, seeing the blood, that changed everything, instantly, undeniably. You couldn't ignore it now. Senator Whitman's face, sources say, went from kinda satisfied to genuinely worried. Realized this was becoming a PR nightmare, fast. But then right at that moment, this calm, authoritative voice cuts through the tension. From right behind Hargrove, "Is there a problem here?" It was James Rodriguez. Appeared almost out of nowhere, solid build, now standing right between Solomon and the security guys. Symbolically, physically. And he doesn't just ask, he identifies himself. Staff Sergeant James Rodriguez, United States Marine Corps, retired. Pulls out his military ID, driver's license. Hargrove actually hesitates, clearly thrown off by this sudden authoritative figure. And then James drops the connection. He's concerned when I see a decorated Force Recon Marine being harassed at his son's graduation, especially when that Marine saved my life in Fallujah. Talk about loyalty. A direct challenge to Hargrove's authority, grounded in shared sacrifice. And that intervention, it wasn't solo. Instantly, powerfully, those other teammates, Chen, Ortiz, Reynolds, Fisher, Jackson, they emerged. From different spots in the crowd. Silent coordination. Like they had practiced this. They formed this protective semicircle around Solomon, their movement showing years of working together, unspoken communication, the bond forged in combat. Chen, super calm, immediately starts documenting. Photos, video. Building the undeniable record. It was just this powerful, unified display of loyalty, solidarity, the whole dynamic. It just flipped. Dramatically, the balance of power shifted right there.
Yeah, and just like that, the whole atmosphere changes completely. The crowd, quiet before, stunned, starts murmuring. Then people start pulling out phones, searching names, whispers get louder. They're finding the service records, 27 years service, Bronze Star with Valor, multiple combat deployments, presidential unit citation. These details ripple through the audience. The narrative in that room, it just turned hard against the Academy security. Fast. Reynolds, one of the SEALs, steps up, talks directly to Headmaster Kensington, lays it out plain. "We're not negotiating, sir," he says firm. "We're simply ensuring that our brother-in-arms can watch his son graduate without being physically assaulted." Assures him, once the ceremony's done, they'll leave peacefully. But not before. Then James Rodriguez turns to Senator Whitman, cuts right through the senator's attempt to look in charge. "With all due respect, Senator," Rodriguez says, voice full of authority, "the only security incident we've witnessed today was when your head of security put his hands on a decorated combat veteran who was sitting peacefully beside his wife." Oof. And Chen adds the crucial detail, emphasizing their thoroughness. "And we've been documenting the entire interaction. Every single request to see Master Sergeant Dracason's invitation when other attendees weren't subjected to the same scrutiny." Basically saying, we have the receipts. What happens next is just a PR meltdown for Westridge Academy and Senator Whitman, total disaster. Whitman tries to slip out a side door, realizing how bad this looks, but reporters are already there. Social media had alerted them. His hasty retreat gets caught on video, more damning visuals. And Vanessa's video, the one she took on her phone, goes viral instantly, shared like crazy by civil rights groups, over 50,000 views in the first hour alone. But just climbing. News vans start pulling up outside. This private school graduation suddenly becomes this public trial about institutional discrimination. And this whole thing at Westridge, shocking as it wasn't just contained to that day. It blew the lid off other stuff. These Black at Westridge social media accounts popped up almost immediately. Students feeling empowered by Solomon's stand started sharing their stories, similar experiences. It exposed this whole pattern of systemic discrimination way beyond this one confrontation. Then even more damning. A former security guard from Westridge sees the news. He posts details online about specific instructions he got to monitor minority attendees more closely at school events. This public confession, it created this undeniable record of a discriminatory policy, made it crystal clear Solomon's experience wasn't some fluke. It was a symptom of a much deeper systemic problem at the school. But through all of this chaos, the sudden media storm, Solomon Dracason, his focus almost superhumanly stayed locked on his son. He refused to let the confrontation, the public mess, overshadow Tyron's big achievement. And the SEALs, they just stood there, protective, disciplined perimeter around him. It was this incredible visual of loyalty, solidarity, what real military honor looks like, standing by your own, defending what's right. Such a stark contrast to the security team's actions. The takeaway here, one act of courage backed by solidarity can really expose deep injustice and force accountability. So Solomon's story, while incredibly dramatic, unique in how it exploded publicly, it's unfortunately not some isolated freak event. It's just a really vivid, painful example of these deep-rooted problems that seem to run through U.S. military academies. The very places meant to train our future military leaders, supposedly based on merit and service. Let's really unpack some of the other experiences that feed into this feeling of being othered, treated differently just because of race. Okay, take the whole issue of memorializing a segregated past. It's pretty stark at these historic institutions. Jeffrey Easterling, he's a Black West Point graduate, class of 2013. He still talks about being astonished by how much Confederate history is still prominently displayed on campus years after he graduated. He mentions a huge 6-foot painting of Confederate General Robert E. Lee in the library. And unsettlingly, that painting also shows a slave. Plus, there's a barracks building named for Lee. The main entrance, Lee Gate, is on Lee Road. These aren't just, dusty old plaques. They're everyday reminders. Easterling clearly remembers feeling devastated when a classmate pointed out the slave in that Lee painting. Asked him, how is the only black person on a wall in this whole massive school? A slave. That image, he said, just felt totally contradictory to the ideals of equality West Point was supposed to stand for. And later, when he worked as a diversity admissions officer, recruiting kids from underrepresented backgrounds, he found it so hard to tell them, yeah, trust the military, when their kids could just Google it and ask, why is there a barracks named after Lee? It's this direct clash between the recruitment message of inclusion and the visual reality on campus. It creates this really weird disconnect at West Point. Cadets learned in history class that Confederate soldiers weren't heroes. Their cause was wrong. Yet their symbols, their names, are still celebrated right there on campus. It's a fundamental contradiction. Now, the latest defense spending bill did mandate surveying military sites for Confederate stuff, including West Point. But the deadline for actually doing anything about it, removing names, replacing symbols, that's still over 2 years away. Which means these constant unsettling reminders of a deeply discriminatory past, they're staying put for now, affecting cadets of color every single day.
Yeah, and this point about symbols, it's not just about looks, is it? It really gets at this core tension between, historical reverence and the actual lived experiences of cadets today, especially the very cadets the academies say they want to recruit more of. It makes you ask, how can these places genuinely create an inclusive environment? How can they truly reflect the diverse nation they serve when they keep honoring figures tied to a legacy of division and oppression? Especially when those symbols actively undermine the trust and the feeling of belonging for so many current and potential service members. It's this huge cognitive dissonance for cadets of color to constantly navigate. It messes with their sense of identity there. The key insight, I think, is that symbols have real power, and when they glorify a divisive past, they actively work against efforts to build a truly inclusive present. And beyond the statues and building names, the day-to-day reality for cadets of color often involves this constant stream of microaggressions and sometimes outright discrimination. Carlton Shelley II, he was recruited for football at West Point, started in 2009. On the field, he said, the team felt like a brotherhood. Skin color didn't matter there, that's good. But off the field, totally different story. He and other black classmates, he said, were too often treated like the stereotype of the angry black man. He remembers being repeatedly in trouble or being corrected for infractions that were not actually infractions, described it as feeling like a very deliberate choice to dig and to push on certain individuals compared with white cadets. This constant targeting, being scrutinized for things others weren't, it had a real impact. He noted a crazy low number of black students from his starting class actually graduated, suggests these subtle pressures can really push people out. Xavier Bruce graduated from the Air Force Academy back in '99, became a lieutenant colonel. He shared something similar. For him, he explained, it was often the ongoing slights directed at him as a black man, rather than openly racist behavior that cut deep. He said, we just feel it. We feel the energy behind it, and it just eats us away. That really speaks to how insidious, how exhausting this subtle but constant discrimination can be. It's not always one big racist event, but that low-level hum of bias that just wears you down. And students of color have been using social media pretty powerfully to shine a light on this stuff. Accounts like Black at West Point, Black at USAFA, Black at USNA, places to share experiences anonymously. One Air Force Academy grad from 2020 wrote about a white upperclassman telling him, speak English, this is America, just because he was speaking Spanish with a friend, just being told you don't belong for speaking your own language. And the sheer weight of these experiences, how common they seem to be, really came into focus after George Floyd's murder in 2020. That sparked a huge national conversation about race, right? So a group of prominent West Point alums, pretty bravely, put out this scathing 40-page letter, detailed major failures in tackling intolerance and racism at the academy. And an appendix to that letter, it had raw, anonymous stories from cadets, first-hand accounts. Some were just chilling. One cadet wrote, and this is deeply disturbing, I had a racist roommate that would call me the N-word and spit on me. I told the 4th Regimental Tactical Officer about it, and they did nothing. According to that report, these aren't just a few isolated complaints, they point to deeply entrenched problems. And sometimes, it seems, leadership doesn't address them, creates an environment where horrific things like that can happen without consequence.
Okay, so we have these powerful personal stories, these clear institutional failures. What does it all mean for the leadership pipeline into the military? These academies are supposed to be pure meritocracies, right? Where talent and hard work are all that matter for getting ahead. But these stories, they reveal these significant systemic barriers that really undermine that whole idea. And it's a crucial question because our military strength depends on its leadership. And that leadership needs to reflect the diverse nation it protects. Now, West Point, for instance, is making progress getting more diverse students in the door. The class of 2024 was about 37% non-white. That's up from 25% a decade ago. So progress on paper. But those numbers don't capture the full experience once they're inside. Jeffrey Easterling, the grad we mentioned, he points out that the faculty, the mentors shaping these future leaders, is still mostly white. That makes it tough for students of color who don't see themselves reflected in those leadership roles. Harder to find mentors, feel understood, maybe even harder to ask for help when they're struggling. That lack of faculty representation, it seems, can just make feelings of isolation worse, make it harder to feel like you truly belong, which likely contributes to people leaving. And if you look closer at graduation rates, between different racial groups, some academies show really worrying gaps. At the Naval Academy, for example, black midshipmen had the lowest graduation rate, 74%. That's way below the school average of 87%. It's even starker at the Coast Guard Academy. Between 2011 and 2020, the black graduation rate was only 65%. That's like 20 points behind other groups. These aren't just numbers. They suggest that while more diverse students might be getting in, they're not necessarily graduating at the same rate as white students. That strongly points to potential systemic problems with retention, with support, with addressing the very discrimination we're talking about. It's like a funnel that gets much narrower for students of color. And the nomination system itself, how most students get into these academies, plays this huge, almost hidden role in keeping these disparities going. It dates back to the 1840s, originally meant to build a geographically diverse officer corps. But today, it still means 60–70% of students get nominated by senators or representatives from their home state. The problem now is demographics have shifted. So this system gives disproportionate influence to rural congressional districts, which tend to be statistically whiter, less diverse than cities. It's an old system with very modern, unequal consequences. The data really shows the imbalance. Only 6% of nominations to the Army, Air Force, and Naval Academies from current members of Congress went to black candidates. But black individuals make up 15% of 18 to 24-year-olds in the U.S. For Hispanic students, 8% of nominations, but they're 22% of young adults. Sources pointed to examples like Senators Ted Cruz and John Cornyn in Texas. Their nominations had some of the lowest percentages of people of color, 23% and 20%, but Texas. Over 60% of young adults there are Black, Asian, Hispanic, or Latino. Now, Senator Cruz's office said they picked based on objective merits like test scores, GPA, community service with names and race removed. But the outcome still shows clear underrepresentation. The system, whatever the intent, isn't delivering equitable results. But even with all these challenges, these hurdles, the academies still represent a huge opportunity, a unique path forward for a lot of people. Curtis Harris graduated West Point back in '78. He shared a powerful perspective. First in his family to become an officer, he called the academy ammunition for success in a society where things aren't always equal. Pointed out his uncles, his stepfather, Black servicemen in earlier times, had very few options beyond enlisted ranks. But Harris also stressed, diversifying West Point is not going to happen by itself. It needs active effort, encouraging diverse candidates to apply, making sure this tough but incredible opportunity is known and accessible. Still, for others, that question of belonging, of really fitting in, it sticks around long after they leave, or even while they're there. Greg Elliott, for example, he left the Merchant Marine Academy before graduating, and he wonders deeply if having more diverse faculty and students could have changed his course by making him feel he belonged. His experience echoes something another Black alum told him. The academy was a terrible place to be at, but it's a great place to be from. Okay, what? That paradox. It perfectly captures the struggle, the amazing prestige, the opportunities you get from graduating, weighed against the difficult, often isolating, sometimes discriminatory experience of actually being there as a person of color. The key takeaway here, even in places striving for pure meritocracy, these deep biases, historical legacies, can subtly but powerfully shape who gets in, who succeeds, and who truly feels like they belong. And this whole struggle for a genuinely level playing field, it's definitely not just limited to the academies, to that initial leadership pipeline. The sources make it really clear there's this deep-rooted culture of racism and discrimination that just stubbornly persists across almost every branch of the U.S. military. Despite, repeated efforts to get rid of it, it impacts people from day one right through to retirement. Okay, let's think about retired Air Force Lieutenant Colonel Stephanie Davis. Her story is powerful. Joined in 1988, saw the military as the path to the American dream, right? A place of equal treatment, pure meritocracy. Grew up with little. Service promised a clear path based on hard work. But over decades of service, advancing steadily, became a flight surgeon, a commander. She found she was seen, as she put it, only as a Black woman. White colleagues actually gave her the call sign ABW, Angry Black Woman, a classic racist trope. And they insisted it was just a joke. Unbelievable. She dealt with white subordinates refusing to salute her, refusing orders, patients refusing to use her rank, blatant racial slurs, and during her residency. Sole Black resident, no Black faculty, staff, nobody. Imagine that isolation. Davis explains how blindsiding this reality is. For Blacks and minorities, when we initially experience racism or discrimination in the military, we feel blindsided. We're taught to believe that it's the one place where everybody has a level playing field based on merit. Okay. She points out how insidious, how pervasive racism can be. It creates not just personal pain, but a harmful and dangerous work environment. And critically for the military, a lack of cohesion that can literally be deadly in combat situations. Her words are stark. And a lot of us suffer in silence because we feel like there's nothing that can be done. Davis was medically retired in 2019, over 2 decades of service. Feeling, as she said, ground down by overt racism and retaliated against for accusing a superior of sexually assaulting her. Her story just highlights the huge personal cost and the systemic failures that can end distinguished careers like that. Prematurely. Heartbreakingly.
That's such a crucial point, and it raises this vital question. If trust and cohesion are absolutely paramount in military units, they're literally force multipliers, how does this pervasive, often subtle racism just eat away at that very foundation? Like General Mark Milley, chairman of the Joint Chiefs, told Congress, divisiveness leads to defeat. A house divided does not stand. This isn't just about individual feelings or discomfort. It's about unit effectiveness, morale, readiness, and ultimately our national security. It massively impacts retention, the trust between soldiers in life or death moments, and just the basic ability to do your job effectively when you're also fighting this internal battle against prejudice. A battle often invisible to others. The core insight has to be, racism inside the military isn't just a social problem, it's a genuine strategic weakness. And these experiences of being systematically othered, they show up in all sorts of ways, often deeply personal, across all ranks. Officers, enlisted, everyone. Major Tyrone Collier, he's a reserve Marine, remembers this really poignant moment back in 2010. He was a brand new second lieutenant. A black enlisted Marine gave him this unusually long salute. Collier asked him why. The Marine explained, voice full of emotion, "Sir, I just have to come clean. We never see black officers, we never see people like you, and it makes me extraordinarily proud." That moment just highlights the stark lack of representation higher up and the immense hope even one example can inspire. Collier also remembered something from even before he joined. At a formal dinner, an officer selection officer actually discouraged him from talking to another black applicant, said pretty bluntly, "You guys might not want to isolate yourselves. It might not look good." That subtle but clear message, it immediately sends this powerful pressure to assimilate, right? Don't seem too black, even before you're officially in. Colonel Thomas Hobbs, a retired Marine, talked about the huge pressure of trying to just blend into this overwhelmingly white male culture, while at the same time feeling this intense unspoken need to outperform white officers just to disprove stereotypes. It's a double burden. He mentioned how often black enlisted Marines would come to him, frustrated, asking, "Oh man, what's wrong with these guys?" Coming to you like you're the expert on everything black. Ooh. That shows this extra, often unrecognized weight on minority officers, expected to be cultural mediators, problem solvers for racial issues from below, on top of their already demanding jobs. It's an emotional, intellectual tax white officers just don't pay, and the pressure to culturally assimilate, it goes down to really basic, everyday things. Former Air Force Master Escort Ricardo Lemos shared a striking story. He was medically discharged partly because a superior discouraged him from speaking Spanish to his mother on the phone in the office. "Because people can't understand you." That kind of comment, it just dismisses and devalues your whole cultural identity, your family connection. Similarly, black women in the military constantly face being labeled aggressive or difficult just for being assertive. Their natural hair gets called unkempt or unprofessional. That's discrimination, forcing conformity to Eurocentric standards, erasing part of who they are. These aren't just rules, they're cultural impositions. DeMarcus Gilliard, veteran Marine captain, also felt that unspoken pressure to prove himself better than his peers. Like he was a symbol of black Americans when he started officer training. Now, he credited the Marine Corps with making strides in diversity at the top, said he didn't experience overt racism there, but he made this really critical, nuanced point. It's a great idea. I don't see color, but it actually is pretty dismissive. And I think not talking about issues of race actually exacerbates the problem. We need to be able to talk about these things. That highlights the vital need for open, honest conversation about race, not this colorblind approach that, even if well meant, just sweeps real problems under the rug, makes them invisible, impossible to fix. The key insight from all this: racism in the ranks is often insidious. Microaggressions, cultural pressures, this unspoken burden on minority service members, all eroding trust and cohesion.
Okay, so we've got these compelling, often really personal stories. But what does the official data say? The policies. Are these just isolated incidents? Or does the data show a bigger pattern, systemic issues the military is maybe struggling to really get a handle on, despite the ideals? The sources, unfortunately, give some pretty stark answers. Let's start with accountability. The military's own justice system, it doesn't even have an explicit category for hate crimes. Think about that. That makes it incredibly hard, basically impossible, to accurately track crimes motivated by prejudice, masks the real scope of racist incidents. Plus, the Defense Department currently has no standard way to track troops kicked out for extremist views. Despite all the public talk about rooting them out, that's a huge blind spot, right? Especially after finding out over 20 people involved in the January 6th Capitol attack had military ties, active duty or recent veterans, the Uniform Code of Military Justice, the UCMJ, the basis of military law. It doesn't adequately cover discriminatory incidents either, a big legal gap. And to make it worse, rank-and-file people of color often face all-white courts-martial panels. Some experts argue this can lead to harsher sentences, perpetuating unequal justice right inside the system. But the sheer number of complaints filed, that really underscores how widespread the problem is, even without specific hate crime tracking. In just fiscal year 2020, the military processed over 750 discrimination complaints based on race or ethnicity from service members. 750. And it's not just uniformed personnel. Civilians working for the Army, Air Force, Navy, they filed over 900 racial discrimination complaints, plus another 350 plus based on skin color that same year. That's according to EEOC data. It points to a widespread issue across the entire defense world, not just isolated units. A big 2020 DoD Diversity and Inclusion Board report. It highlighted these major gaps in leadership diversity too, found that while enlisted ranks were a bit more diverse than the overall U.S. civilian workforce, the officer corps definitely was not. The report showed the diversity gap gets wider the higher you go up the ranks. Commissioned officers were a stark 73% white, only 8% black, 8% Hispanic, 6% Asian. This serious lack of diversity at the top where the big decisions get made. It perpetuates an environment where people of color might not see themselves represented in power, makes it harder to see a long-term career path, undermines the military's ability to innovate, adapt. And what about the internal measures meant to fix this, like surveys and stuff? Honestly, the picture looks pretty mixed. The Defense Equal Opportunity Management Institute, DOMI, uses these anonymous organizational climate surveys, tries to gauge unit effectiveness, spot diversity issues. But the responses? They vary wildly. Some Marines at Camp Pendleton reported in surveys, racist, sexual, and bigoted jokes are a daily occurrence, and very little has really ever been done to prevent it. And a really troubling issue. Women in Navy SEAL units, for example, often feared being identified in these supposedly anonymous surveys because the demographics break down responses by gender, rank, race, and there just aren't many women in special ops. That fear totally undermines the anonymity, discourages honest reporting, and worse, these crucial surveys get destroyed after only 3 years, makes tracking long-term trends, holding people accountable, almost impossible. An Associated Press investigation dug even deeper. Used Freedom of Information requests to get aircraft carrier surveys nobody had seen before. Found that in 2019, over 1,600 sailors, that's a shocking 1 in 5, disagreed with the statement that racial discrimination does not occur on their ships. 1 in 5 think it does occur. Nearly a third said they'd experienced racial jokes, comments, slurs. Nearly 1 in 4 said they couldn't report incidents through their chain of command without fearing retaliation. Shows a huge lack of trust. And an incredible 4 out of 10 said discipline was unfairly administered. 4 out of 10. This data, straight from sailors, paints this clear, undeniable picture. In an environment where discrimination is common, trust in reporting is low, and fairness is seriously questioned. Key takeaway here. Despite internal efforts, the data shows widespread racial discrimination, weak accountability, and a major trust deficit in the ranks. And this problem, the sources show, it reaches right down to the very first places potential recruits might interact with the military. High school junior ROTC programs. These programs are often set up in schools with more students of color. They're a big pipeline into the services, introducing kids to military life, military values. Fardell Anthony Hopkins, he's a retired Black Master Sergeant, used to be a JROTC instructor. He reported some deeply disturbing stuff at Lake Brantley High School in Florida. A student showed him overtly racist social media posts from other cadets, targeting him. Vile language. One comment said he needed to be tar and feathered. Another just, no wind in my core. Horrific. Hopkins also noticed a shift in attitudes around late 2019. White students decorated ceiling tiles in class with messages supporting President Trump. This display made the parents of one black student pull their daughter out immediately. Feared for her safety, Hopkins said, profoundly dismayed, "I could see that these students were a different breed." Hopkins complained repeatedly about the harassment, the racism, but initially, school admin didn't do much. It wasn't until other students, horrified, went straight to the principal, Brian Blazewicz, that they finally acted. Gave the main kids involved just 4-day suspensions. That's it. Hopkins also contacted the Air Force JROTC head officer. Got sympathy, but was told discipline was the high school's job, since instructors are technically school employees. Hopkins felt defeated and isolated. No institutional backup. He ended up leaving JROTC entirely, dropped an EEOC lawsuit. His conclusion is chilling. He now thinks JROTC just feels like a breeding ground for hatred, and it's not being checked. Leaves him deeply worried about its future and the values being taught to kids who might join the military. These experiences, academies, JROTC, active duty, retirement, they all really drive home this painful truth. The military, yeah, it really is a microcosm of society with all its issues. Nick Shands, former Air Force airman, he felt this sharply. One of few black airmen on a nearly all-white base in Idaho. Felt singled out, constantly visible, different. He remembers this humiliating dumpster task, made to sift through garbage for documents all day, superiors watching him find nothing. He believes that, and being told he wasn't built for the military. Deliberate attempts to embarrass and to mentally break him, push him out. This kind of targeted stuff continued at other bases, just wore him down. He left the military in 2018. But after George Floyd's murder, that global reckoning with racial injustice, Shands felt he had to do something. He actually confronted one of the superiors involved in that dumpster incident, who, ironically, had posted Black Lives Matter online. Shands reached out, reminded her of what happened, said he hoped it didn't take the murders of black humans for her to see the deep discrimination in America, and specifically in the Air Force. To her credit, she admitted her incredible ignorance about systemic racism, a cathartic moment for Shands, but still painful. His conclusion is powerful, simple. You're not going to escape racism anywhere in this country. The military is a microcosm of regular society. Key takeaway. Racism can affect even introductory military programs. Its persistence in the ranks mirrors broader society, showing the military isn't immune to the prejudices it defends against. So the stories we've gone through today, from Solomon Dracen's shocking confrontation right down to these daily experiences of cadets, officers, they paint this vivid, deeply troubling picture. Persistent racial discrimination inside the U.S. military. But beyond the specific incidents, beyond the personal hurt, there's this deeper, often invisible psychological cost. Experts are recognizing it more and more. They call it racial trauma and racial battle fatigue. It's the profound toll of constant bias. Racial trauma, the experts explain, it's different from standard PTSD. Critically different because victims face constant racial microaggressions. It's not one big event. It's this continuous grinding stream of subtle and overt bias. The frequency, intensity, and pervasiveness of racial stereotypes, racial bias, and racial discrimination produce emotional and psychological distress, physiological stress reactions. This constant state of being on guard, this relentless attack on your identity, your dignity, it leads to racial battle fatigue. Utter exhaustion from hearing, seeing, and experiencing incessant racism and racial discrimination. Symptoms sound a lot like combat veterans with PTSD. Increased vigilance, being hypersensitive, intrusive memories, burnout, irritability, serious mental health issues like depression, anxiety. That phrase, racial battle fatigue, it really captures the exhausting uphill fight people face daily against discrimination. It's like a war fought from within. And this constant battle, this feeling of being othered, it inevitably creates deep fear, leads to massive underreporting of incidents. Timothy Berry, Black West Point grad, class of 2013, never felt safe reporting racist incidents there, feared unwanted scrutiny, worried any tiny flaw he had would be blown up and used against him if he spoke out. And that's not just his fear. An Inspector General's report on the Coast Guard Academy found nearly a dozen race-based harassment claims between 2013 and 2018 were mishandled, ignored, downplayed, systematically, even worse. Harassment was underreported in part because of concerns about negative consequences for speaking up. Confirms the fear was rational. LTCMDer Kimberly Young McClear, a black woman who taught there, faced years of harassment retaliation herself. Still hears from cadets, faculty, staff afraid to speak out because they tell her they're going against a very powerful institution. The weight of that silence is just immense.
And that raises this profoundly important question, doesn't it? How can a military whose entire strength relies on unity, trust, the absolute cohesion between service members, how can it possibly thrive when a significant chunk of its people are experiencing this kind of battle fatigue from within its own ranks? It deeply impacts everything, not just individual well-being, burnout, mental health, but critical institutional things too. Retention, recruitment, the actual operational effectiveness of units. It just highlights the desperate need for robust, genuinely protected reporting mechanisms, ways for people to speak out without fear of retaliation, creating an environment where tackling these issues is seen as strengthening the institution, not weakening it. The core insight here has to be the psychological toll of racism, this racial battle fatigue. It weakens the military from the inside out, hitting both individual soldiers and overall effectiveness. Now, despite these really deep challenges, the slow pace of change, there are ongoing efforts to address this stuff. Though, yeah, huge challenges remain. Importantly, top leaders have made strong public statements. General Mark Milley, the Joint Chiefs Chairman, told Congress flat out the military cannot afford racism or discrimination. Emphasized cohesion is a force multiplier and divisiveness leads to defeat. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin, at its confirmation, pledged powerfully to rid the ranks of racists and extremists, especially after the Capitol riot highlighted that internal threat. General David Berger, Marine Corps General, also framed diversity as essential for survival, said too much similarity, we're going to get killed because we're going to end up with solutions easy to counter. This consistent acknowledgement from the very top, it's a crucial first step, signals a potential shift in priorities. And legislatively, the latest big defense spending bill actually includes specific tools aimed at tackling racism and extremism in the ranks. It mandates new tracking and reporting for supremacist, extremist, gang activity, vital for actually identifying and removing dangerous people. It also creates a new inspector general specifically to oversee diversity and inclusion efforts, a dedicated watchdog for progress and accountability. And crucially, the bill requires new questions on those climate surveys we talked about, explicitly asking about racism, anti-Semitism, supremacism, if people answer honestly and if leadership acts on it. These questions could finally give us much more transparent, actionable data on the real scope of the problem, get beyond vague statements. But to really get why this is still such a struggle, you have to remember the history. The U.S. military was segregated officially until the mid-1950s. Shocking, right? Academies integrated earlier, yes. Henry O. Flipper, West Point's first black grad in 1877, faced unbelievable prejudice. White classmates, professors literally refused to speak to him or acknowledge him. Total isolation. So the fight for true equality, real inclusion, it's clearly ongoing. It's this long, tough journey from just formal desegregation to genuine equity, a real sense of belonging for everyone, a journey spanning generations still underway today. And even symbolic battles keep playing out, highlighting this ongoing tension between service and identity, especially for minority service members. Like the whole debate about wearing military uniforms at high school graduations, it shows that bigger societal struggle. Laws like Brandon's Law in New Hampshire, named for Marine Lance Corporal Brandon Garabrandt, denied wearing his uniform, then tragically died in Afghanistan, and others in PACA, they now officially allow it. But the choice. Still deeply personal, PBT Megan Howerton wasn't allowed to wear her Marine blues at graduation, chose not to participate at all rather than wear it hidden under her gown. Felt disrespectful. Even when allowed, some, like Michael Joy, chose not to stand out, wore a sash instead of his uniform. Felt actually serving was his patriotism. Didn't need the uniform at graduation to prove it. These small, personal choices, they reflect this continuing tension. Celebrating service versus ensuring full, equal inclusion for everyone in uniform, whatever their background. Key takeaway from this last part. Leaders acknowledge it, laws try to fix it, but the military segregated past and these ongoing symbolic fights show that getting to true equitable inclusion, it's still a long, complex road ahead.
We've covered a lot of ground today. Some really complex, sometimes deeply uncomfortable territory. From that dramatic standoff at the graduation that kicked us off, right through to the systemic, daily challenges people of color face throughout the U.S. military. It's a powerful, maybe sobering reminder, isn't it? That our institutions, even the ones we hold up for their ideals, service, unity, sacrifice, they inevitably reflect the wider society they sit in, with all its good parts and, yeah, all its deeply ingrained flaws, too.
And what's truly fascinating, I think, is the incredible resilience you see. Individuals who keep serving, keep pushing for real change within these massive institutions, often facing serious pushback. We also see this slow, but hopefully steady, momentum towards actually acknowledging and trying to address these deep-rooted problems. It's definitely a journey, right? Needs constant vigilance, open conversation, and crucially, a collective willingness to face uncomfortable truths, even when they challenge our cherished ideas about what these institutions stand for.
For you listening, this deep dive hopefully offers some powerful, maybe granular insight into the hidden battles so many people face, even inside organizations specifically built for unity and strength. It really prompts us to think about how much further we as a whole society still have to go to truly live up to the ideals of equality and justice we champion so often. So here's a final thought to chew on. If the military really is, as one source powerfully put it, a microcosm of regular society, what does the persistence of racism, these stories of racial battle fatigue inside its ranks, tell us about the bigger picture of racial justice in our country? And maybe more importantly, what role do each of us play? Not just watching, but actively participating, challenging those invisible lines that are still being drawn in so many unexpected places, making sure every single person's dignity and their service is truly recognized and deeply respected.